The year was 1851. In the quiet town of Independence, Missouri, the widowed Eliza Harrow walked among the graves at dawn, collecting the teeth of the newly buried. Locals whispered she was building something, or someone, but no one dared ask why until the digging sounds began at night. The town of Independence had always carried a strange stillness, the kind that hung in the air after a storm. In 1851, it was a place of worn cobblestone streets, sagging porches, and endless whispers carried on the wind. And at the center of those whispers was one woman, Eliza Harrow. She had once been known for her kindness. In the years before, tragedy took her. She had been the wife of Thomas Harrow, the local dentist, a man of education and temper, whose hands knew both healing and harm. Together they'd lived in a small, ivy-covered house at the edge of town, but after his death, something inside her seemed to collapse. The lights in the Harrow home no longer glowed. Curtains stayed drawn. She was seen only at funerals, standing apart, face hidden beneath her black veil. Children spoke of her as a ghost that still breathed. Women crossed the street when she passed. Men avoided her eyes, perhaps out of fear or guilt or the uneasy memory of something she once knew about them. It began with the funerals. Eliza would appear silently beside the grieving families, gloved hands folded, her head bowed. Sometimes she lingered after the mourners left, her figure remaining in the rain, motionless, as though waiting for the ground itself to speak. Soon, strange things followed. Fresh graves appeared disturbed, the soil unsettled as if by small, careful hands. The caretaker, old Henry Cobb, swore he once saw her carrying a lantern through the cemetery at dawn. She wasn't crying, he said. She was humming. A tune too soft to name, but not the kind that comforts. By midsummer, her reputation had shifted from widow to omen. Chickens went missing. A dog was found with its teeth neatly removed. When a group of boys dared to throw stones at her gate, one returned home missing a tooth, torn out clean, as if by surgical precision. The sheriff dismissed it as superstition. Grief makes people see things, he said. But grief in Eliza's case had become something else entirely. It had taken root in her, quiet, meticulous, methodical. And when the moon hung low and pale over Independence, those awake claimed to see a flicker of lamplight moving through her window, and the glint of something white, a table full of teeth, gleaming like pearls under candlelight. If you lived in this town, would you have stayed or run? Before the town began whispering her name in fear, there had been another name, Thomas Harrow. To speak of Eliza without him was like describing a house without its foundation. In life he had been respected, even admired. A dentist by trade, an anatomist by fascination, and a man who believed that science could tame the mysteries of death. He had studied in St. Louis for a time, where modern medicine was clawing its way out of superstition. There he'd become obsessed with the theory that the human body remembers itself, that even in death, a nerve or muscle could retain the echo of life, a spark, if only one knew how to find it. Eliza would often sit beside him as he spoke of it late into the night, his words dancing like firelight. The teeth, Eliza, they are the last to decay. They may yet hold memory. When they returned to Independence, Thomas set up his dental chair in the barn, far from town gossip. At first, he treated neighbors and travelers, pulling teeth, setting jaws, fitting dentures. But over time, fewer patients came, and the work he did grew stranger. Crates began arriving from the east, filled with glass jars, copper wires, and surgical tools that no one in Missouri could name. The smell that drifted from the barn changed, from antiseptic to rot. In April of 1851, Thomas fell ill. The doctor called it consumption, but those close enough to see him swore it wasn't just sickness. His gums had blackened, his teeth, once pristine, loosened one by one, as though rejecting the very man they belonged to. Eliza tended to him faithfully, washing his blood-stained linens, spoon-feeding him broth, and whispering prayers that always ended with, "You'll speak again." The night he died, thunder rolled across the plains. The caretaker of the cemetery remembered Eliza arriving alone before dawn, dressed in black, insisting on burying him herself. She lowered the coffin without waiting for witnesses, and when she left, she took the lantern with her, though the sun was already rising. For days afterward, no one saw her. When she finally emerged, she was changed. Her face pale, her hands trembling but purposeful. She nailed the barn doors shut with rusted iron spikes and whispered something over the seal. The sound of hammering echoed across the fields for hours. By dusk, the house had gone still again, but those who passed on the road claimed they heard something faint through the walls. A man's voice, hoarse and broken, whispering her name. Tell me in the comments, do you believe this was grief or something darker? By late summer, Independence had grown uneasy. The churchyard, once a place of quiet mourning, had become the center of something unspeakable. The caretaker, Henry Cobb, noticed it first. The soil on certain graves appeared disturbed, as though someone had been working beneath the moonlight. He tried to convince himself it was animals or rain, erosion, but deep down he knew better. One morning, as he made his rounds, he saw her. Eliza Harrow, black veil drawn, standing over the fresh grave of a young man named Peter Lang. The boy had died in a mill accident, his jaw crushed beneath machinery. The funeral had ended hours earlier, yet here she was, still, silent, her hands clasped before her. Cobb swore she didn't move for nearly an hour. When she finally turned to leave, she paused and looked directly at him. Through that veil, he saw her eyes, hollow, red-rimmed, and utterly calm. After that day, rumors spread like plague. Children claimed she carried small wooden boxes from the churchyard at dawn. A farmer's wife said she'd seen Eliza kneeling beside a grave with a metal tool in hand, something like a dental pick, scraping at the soil. And once, when lightning struck the steeple during a storm, someone swore they saw her silhouette against the flash, bent low over an open grave. At first, the sheriff dismissed it all as hysteria. He'd buried his own wife 2 years earlier and knew too well how grief could twist a person. Let her mourn in peace, he said. But mourning did not explain the noises. Several townsfolk reported hearing digging sounds late at night, rhythmic, deliberate, coming from the direction of the cemetery. And each time, the next morning, a grave would appear unsettled. The worst moment came when young Mary Cobb, the caretaker's daughter, ran home screaming one dawn. She'd been sent to deliver her father's breakfast when she saw something moving among the gravestones. She said it looked like Eliza, but smaller somehow, hunched, her arms jerking as if pulling something from the ground. When Mary called out, the figure turned, and she saw its face, pale, mouth twisted, filled with teeth that gleamed in the half-light. But the eyes, she said, weren't hers. By noon, half the town knew of it. No one would go near the churchyard after dark. And that night, when the wind carried over the fields, some claimed they heard a faint, unnatural sound drifting through the air, the slow, deliberate clinking of metal against bone. Imagine this was your town. Would you have dared to look? It began as whispers, ghost stories told in the flicker of lamplight, but before long it became something no one could deny. The widow was not just visiting graves, she was taking from them. Henry Cobb, the caretaker, swore he had proof. One night in early September, unable to stand the dread gnawing at him, he decided to follow her. The moon hung like a dull coin in the sky, half swallowed by clouds. From behind a row of headstones, he watched as Eliza knelt beside the grave of a drowned trapper named Elias Root. Her movements were deliberate, almost reverent. She brushed away the soil, exposing the freshly packed earth, and from her apron, she withdrew something metallic, the curved glint of her late husband's dental forceps. Henry held his breath. She wasn't digging to steal valuables. No, she was prying open the mouth of the dead. Each motion of her hand was careful, practiced. There was no fear, no hesitation, only a strange tenderness. When she lifted the skull's jaw into the lantern light, Henry saw her expression. Not disgust, but recognition. She plucked the teeth one by one, laying them neatly in a white linen cloth. The clicking of enamel echoed faintly through the still air. When she finished, she leaned close to the body, her lips almost touching where its ears once were, and whispered something too low to hear. Then she buried it all again, patting the soil flat as if tucking a child into bed. When she rose, Henry stumbled back in panic, his lantern falling against a stone. The noise broke the silence like a gunshot. Eliza froze. Slowly she turned toward the sound, and for a moment, her veil shifted. Beneath it, her mouth twitched, not in fear but in a small, knowing smile. Henry fled. By morning he was feverish, incoherent, babbling of eyes in the ground and voices with teeth. He died 3 days later, his gums bloodied and swollen, as if something had been gnawing from within. After his death, the town's pastor ordered the churchyard locked at night, but it did little good. People still heard her out there, then the munt of the faint scrape of metal, the soft clinking of glass jars, and once, unmistakably, a quiet laugh. Some said she was collecting the teeth to sell. Others whispered she was assembling something. But those who saw her house at night claimed there was more than one shadow moving inside. The clicking never stopped. Would you have watched, or would you have gone inside to stop her? By October, fear had seeped into every corner of Independence. Doors were bolted before sunset. The church bell rang earlier than it used to. And at the edge of town, where the old willow trees swayed over the cemetery path, a young gravedigger named Samuel Crane decided he'd had enough of the widow's nightly trespassing. Samuel was a stubborn man, the kind who believed in what he could touch and nothing else. He laughed at talk of curses, ghosts, or voices beneath the soil. "If she's out there digging up teeth," he told the tavern crowd one evening, "then I'll follow her myself and put an end to it." Those who heard him speak that night would later swear he looked nervous, though his smile never faltered. The following evening, he took his lantern and shovel and waited among the headstones. The wind smelled of rain and turned the trees into whispering silhouettes. Around midnight he saw her, a lone figure gliding between the graves, her black dress dragging through the mud, her lantern swinging in a slow, measured rhythm. She moved toward the older section of the yard, where the ground sank unevenly, and began to kneel. Samuel crept closer, the mud swallowing his footsteps. He could hear it now, that faint methodical click of metal on bone. His stomach tightened. He took another step, and another, until the glow of her lantern fell across his boots. "Eliza," he said quietly. She froze. The wind dropped. Her head turned slightly, though she didn't lift her veil. "You've no right to be here," he said, raising his lantern. "The sheriff will have your hide for this." She said nothing, only the soft clink of something being placed into her basket. Samuel's hand trembled. "What is it you're taking?" he demanded. Her voice, when it came, was not what he expected. Calm, steady, almost kind. "Not taken," she whispered, "gathering." And before he could respond, the lantern flame flickered out, as if snuffed by unseen breath. In the darkness, something brushed past him. Cold, fast. He swung his shovel wildly, striking only air. Then came a sound behind him. Not a cry, not a scream, but the crunch of teeth grinding against each other. When the sun rose, Samuel Crane was gone. All that remained was his lantern, still burning beside an open grave. On Eliza Harrow's doorstep that morning, a small circle of human teeth had been arranged with meticulous care. In its center lay one, larger, crooked, Samuel's front tooth. Tell me in the comments, would you call this madness or a warning? When Samuel Crane vanished, the laughter stopped in Independence. The tavern grew quiet, the markets emptied before dusk, and even the church bell seemed hesitant to ring. It was one thing to fear whispers in the dark, another to lose one of their own. For the first time, Sheriff Elias Wilkes could no longer ignore the widow. Wilkes was not a cruel man, but he had seen things in his years as a lawman that had hardened him. Hangings gone wrong, children found after floods, and once, a mother who swore her dead son still knocked on her door each night. Yet nothing in his life had prepared him for the Harrow house. He arrived just before sunset, his boots heavy with the day's dust. his hand resting on the revolver at his hip. The property was silent except for the groan of the wind through the orchard. Her home looked half alive, vines crawling up the walls, shutters trembling with every breath of air. When Eliza answered the door, she looked neither surprised nor afraid. Her face was pale but unlined, her eyes distant, as if her thoughts lived elsewhere. "Sheriff," she said softly, "I've been expecting you." Wilkes hesitated at the threshold. The odor hit him first, the sharp sting of formaldehyde and something fouler beneath it. The floorboards creaked as he stepped inside. Tables cluttered with jars, wires, melted candles, glass containers lined with cloudy liquid, inside which floated things that might once have been human. Roots of teeth, fragments of jawbone, pieces labeled in her neat handwriting, sample 4, molar nerve intact. He demanded to know what she'd done to Samuel Crane. Her answer came like a lullaby. "He wanted to see," she said. "Now he sees nothing." He lifted his lantern toward the cellar door. "What's down there, Eliza?" She didn't speak, only smiled faintly. "He's waiting." The sheriff took one step toward it before a sound rose from below, slow, rhythmic, metallic. Like the tapping of teeth against glass. He froze, every instinct telling him to leave, but pride held him in place. That night neighbors heard hammering echoing across the fields, steady, deliberate, unending until dawn. The next morning, the sheriff's horse was found tethered outside her house. The saddle was dusted with gray ash. Wilkes himself was gone. And when the pastor went to call on Eliza the following evening, she was seen standing by her gate, brushing soil from her hands. Would you have entered that cellar, or turned back while you still could? 3 days after Sheriff Wilkes vanished, the town decided someone had to go inside the Harrow house. Fear had grown teeth of its own, biting into every conversation, every prayer. Men crossed themselves before walking past her gate, and women barred their windows at dusk. No one saw smoke from her chimney anymore, but faint light still glowed through the cracks of her cellar door at night, a dull pulsing flicker, like a lantern breathing. It was the carpenter, William Trent, who finally volunteered. He had repaired the church roof, built coffins, and seen enough death to believe nothing could surprise him. He arrived at dawn with a hammer, a crowbar, and a small flask for courage. The house greeted him with silence. Dust lay thick as snow, disturbed only by footprints leading from the parlor to the cellar. The air was heavy with the scent of rot, and candle wax, and something else. Copper, faint but distinct, the smell of old blood. He began to inspect the floors, looking for weak boards. Near the fireplace, he noticed something strange. The wood bowed slightly, as if something beneath had pushed upward. Kneeling, he tapped it with the handle of his hammer. Hollow. He pried the boards up one by one, each nail screaming in protest. Beneath them was not the packed earth of a foundation, but loose soil, freshly disturbed. The deeper he dug, the stronger the odor became. Then, from somewhere beneath the dirt, he heard it. A faint mechanical whir, like clockwork winding itself. His breath caught. He brushed aside more soil until metal glinted below. A lattice of wires, copper tubing, and bones fused together. The shape was unmistakable, the curve of a human ribcage, the frame of a spine. But threaded through it were teeth, dozens of them, embedded like jewels in metal. As he stared, something moved. A tremor, soft but deliberate, rippled through the framework. Then a sound, faint, rhythmic, unnatural, a clicking from deep within, as if teeth were grinding in slow, deliberate thought. William stumbled back, his lantern swinging wildly. He turned to run, slamming into the wall. When he looked again, the floorboards had begun to shift, the edges of the hole widening, the soil stirring as though breathing. He fled into the daylight, screaming of a body that hums. The townspeople found him hours later at the church steps, trembling and unable to speak. He died that night. At sunrise, they found his hands laid neatly on the church steps, palms up, each pierced clean through. And in every wound, pressed deep into flesh, were human teeth. Would you have believed him, or buried the truth beneath the floor? For weeks after the carpenter's death, Eliza Harrow was not seen. The townspeople hoped she had fled, or died, or vanished into the woods where even God refused to follow. But one gray morning in late November, she appeared again, walking into the town square as though nothing had happened. The market had only just opened. Fog hung low, swallowing the sound of wagon wheels. Merchants stood behind their stalls in uneasy silence as her black silhouette emerged through the mist. Her veil was still drawn, her gloves spotless. Those close enough to see her eyes said they were not hollow with grief anymore. They were alive with purpose. She moved with the calm certainty of someone who knew she could not be stopped. The butcher froze mid-slice as she approached, asking quietly for twine, wax, and lamp oil. Her voice was soft, measured, but when she spoke certain words, something in her tone seemed to echo, as though another voice beneath it repeated her own. Children followed her from a distance, too afraid to get close. They whispered that. Her basket clicked as she walked, like porcelain knocking against glass. When she paused to buy candles, one small boy swore he heard a faint rattling inside, a sound like teeth rolling together. No one dared confront her. Even the pastor, who had sworn to bring the Lord's light to her home, lowered his head and pretended not to see her. Only Mrs. Granger, the apothecary's wife, dared to speak. "You've no reason to come here," she muttered. "You've done enough harm." Eliza turned slowly toward her. Beneath the veil, her lips curved, not quite a smile, not quite a threat. "I only take what's left behind," she said. "You all throw away what's precious." She paid in silver coins blackened with age, each stamped with a faint pattern of teeth where the minting should have been. The butcher crossed himself as she left. That evening the pastor preached a sermon unlike any other. He spoke of forbidden arts, of resurrection as blasphemy, of souls that refused to stay buried. His voice trembled as he warned that some griefs do not end in death. They begin there. That night, as the fog thickened around the Harrow property, townsfolk claimed they saw light flickering behind her cellar window again, and with it came that same sound, a slow, steady tapping, like a heartbeat that had learned to speak through teeth. Tell me in the comments, do you think she was reviving her husband, or something else entirely? It was on the 12th night after her return to town that a stranger arrived in Franklin County. He came on horseback, wearing a black coat too, fine for the muddy Missouri roads, and carried no luggage but a doctor's satchel. His name, he said, was Dr. Isaac Thorne, though no one had sent for him, and no one could say where he had come from. He rode straight to the inn, but before he entered he paused. His gaze turned toward the North Hill, toward the Harrow estate. He stood there for a long time, hat in hand, staring through the fog like a man listening for something distant. At supper, he asked quiet questions. How long since the widow lost her husband? Where is she buried? Has anyone else fallen ill? His voice had an odd restraint, polite but clipped, as though he were not truly asking to know, but rather confirming what he already suspected. By nightfall, word had reached Eliza's property that a physician had arrived asking after her name. And for the first time since the funeral, the flickering light beneath her cellar went dark. The next morning, Dr. Thorne requested a carriage and rode up the hill. Witnesses said he knocked once, firmly, without hesitation. Eliza opened the door before the echo faded. She did not ask who he was, nor what he wanted. She simply said, "You took your time." Those were the words that chilled the coachman to his bones. He swore her tone was not surprise. It was recognition, as though she had been expecting him for years. The doctor entered and the door closed. For 3 days, no one saw him again. During that time, faint cries were heard at night from the Harrow home, not screams of terror, but moans of exertion, the sound of wood being dragged, chains moving across the floor, and something heavy, something human, being lifted. On the 4th day, Eliza was seen again, standing by her window. Her face was pale, but her hands were covered in blood, though she didn't seem to notice. Dr. Thorne emerged that evening. His face was white as bone, and his satchel, bulged with something wrapped in linen. He said nothing to the coachman who brought him down the hill. But as he passed the churchyard, he whispered under his breath, "She's almost finished." Would you have gone up that hill if you were him, or would you have let the dead rest? Tell me in the comments below. The next morning, the church bell tolled, though no service had been called. Its echoes rolled through Franklin County like the groan of the earth itself. And by noon, word spread, the coffin of Jonathan Harrow had been found open, again. The gravedigger, Silas Grieve, had gone to tend the cemetery after a storm had torn branches from the oak trees. He claimed he found the soil disturbed, not dug from above, but pushed from beneath. The coffin lid was cracked, splintered as though something inside had pressed upward with unnatural force. When Silas lifted it, his lantern nearly went out. The corpse was there, yes, but altered. The skin seemed tighter, less gray, the lips sewn shut with black thread. And worst of all, someone had added new teeth, rows of them. Perfectly white, gleaming like porcelain in the lantern light. He ran screaming down the hill. By dusk, the entire town had gathered around the graveyard fence. Sheriff Dodd ordered the area sealed and sent for the pastor. None dared touch the coffin. The widow stood at the edge of the crowd, veil drawn, her gloved hands clasped tightly before her. "Who did this?" Someone shouted. Eliza only whispered, "He's not ready yet." That night, the pastor and sheriff went to rebury the body under lock and chain. They bolted the coffin, drove iron stakes into the soil, and swore that this time it would stay. But by morning, the ground was uneven again. The chains lay coiled on the grass like shed snakeskin. The coffin was empty. The pastor fell to his knees, weeping. Sheriff Dodd searched the area, but found only footprints leading toward the Harrow house. Long, dragging marks that looked almost human, but not quite. At dawn, they reached the widow's door. She stood waiting for them, her black dress immaculate, the smell of candle wax thick in the air. "I told you," she said calmly. "He was meant to rise." Behind her, in the dimness of the parlor, something shifted. A figure, tall, unsteady, with skin like clay still drying in. The son took one staggering step forward. The sheriff dropped his gun. The pastor whispered, "Dear God, forgive us." The thing that had once been Jonathan Harrow opened its mouth and grinned. Every tooth gleamed perfect white. None were his. Would you have buried him again? Or burned the house to the ground? Tell me in the comments below. By the next morning, nothing in Franklin County felt real. The streets were empty, shutters drawn, and every door barred from within. The sheriff and pastor, who had stood face to face with what should have been dead, swore never to speak of it again. Not to their wives, not to the congregation, not even to God. They met in the church basement that night. 6 men in total. Sheriff Dodd, Pastor Hale, Silas the gravedigger, and 3 townsmen who had seen the tracks. A lantern flickered in the center of the table, its flame small and nervous. "No one will believe us," Dodd said, his voice shaking. "And if they do, they'll leave. The town will die faster than any ghost could kill it." "Pastor?" Hale nodded, pale and trembling. "Then we bury the story, and her." They drew up what would later be known, only in whispers, as the Pact of Silence. Each man signed it with trembling hands, swearing before the Bible to never speak of what walked that night. They would tell the town that the widow had gone mad, that her husband's coffin was destroyed in a storm, and that all the rest, the noise, the tracks, the figure in the fog, were tricks of fear. But outside, the wind carried a different truth. Eliza Harrow's house still stood, its windows glowing faintly with the light of 100 candles. Sometimes, if one stood quietly enough, they could hear the faint sound of humming, an old lullaby, carried by a woman's voice, too calm for mourning. Days turned to weeks. The men who signed the pact began to fade, not from life, but from themselves. Silas was the first. He was found kneeling at the edge of the graveyard, whispering through his teeth, "They don't fit right." His mouth was bleeding. Then came Dodd, who locked himself in his home and hammered every mirror shut. He told his wife he could feel someone else's breath in his reflection. By the end of the month, 3 of the 6 had gone missing. And yet, through it all, the pastor kept his word. He preached of silence and obedience, never of sin. But one Sunday morning, as he stood at the pulpit, he froze mid-sermon. His jaw began to tremble, and as the congregation watched in horror, he spat out 3 perfect white teeth, clean, unbroken, and not his own. He fell to his knees and whispered, "She's not finished with us. Would you have signed that pact, knowing what it might cost you? Tell me in the comments below." By winter's first frost, Pastor Hale had become a shadow of himself. His hair turned white in a matter of weeks. His hands trembled even when he clasped them in prayer. And each Sunday his sermons grew shorter, more frantic, less like messages from God and more like confessions whispered to the walls. He no longer preached about salvation. He spoke of bone and dust, of the way flesh refuses to forget the shape of what once lived inside it. The congregation sat frozen, too afraid to move, as he stared at them with bloodshot eyes and asked, "Do you know what waits beneath your tongue?" Rumors spread that the pastor no longer slept, that at night he could be seen wandering the churchyard barefoot, whispering into the ground. The sexton swore he heard him say, "She's counting them now, one by one." On the morning of his final sermon, the bell rang out before dawn, though no one had touched the rope. The sound was shrill, desperate, as if warning the town itself. When the townsfolk entered the chapel, they found the candles already lit. Pastor Hale stood at the altar, head bowed. He looked calm, almost peaceful, until he spoke. "She is no widow," he said softly. "She is the mouth of the grave, and we, her teeth." A murmur rippled through the pews. He raised his hands. They were shaking violently now. "We sealed the coffin," he said, "but not the hunger that came with it. Every silence feeds her. Every lie keeps her standing." Then he smiled, wide, unnatural, and the congregation gasped. His teeth were not his. Some were too large, others chipped and yellowed, as if pulled from a dozen different mouths. "She shares what she takes," he whispered, "and she's not done sharing." The sheriff lunged toward the altar, but Hale stepped back, clutching his chest. The air around him grew cold. Then came the sound, that faint, steady clicking, the sound of teeth grinding together. When he fell, it wasn't to the floor, but backward, as though something unseen had pulled him down. The last thing anyone heard him say was, "Forgive her. She only wanted him to stay." The church bell rang again, though no one dared touch the rope. That night, every candle in town burned low, no matter how much wax remained. If you heard your pastor say those words, would you believe him or turn away, like the others? Tell me in the comments below. It began just after midnight, a single toll from the church tower that cut through the frost-bitten air like a scream. Then another, and another. By the 10th toll, every soul in Franklin County was awake. The bell was supposed to rest at night. No one touched it after dusk. Yet it swung wildly now, echoing down the valley in a rhythm that almost sounded like breathing, shallow, uneven, human. Sheriff Dodd and 2 deputies stumbled through the fog toward the churchyard. Their lanterns flickered, the light swallowed by the mist as though the air itself didn't want them to see. With each toll they felt the vibration under their boots, not just from the bell, but from the ground. Something beneath the earth was moving. When they reached the church door, it was already open. The inside reeked of wax and decay. Candles burned all along the pews, though no one had lit them. On the altar, the Bible lay open to the book of Job, pages fluttering, though there was no wind. And above it, in the shadows of the tower stairs, something swayed. They climbed slowly, hearts pounding in their throats. The rope that pulled the bell was slick, not with rain, but something thicker. When Dodd's hand touched it, he jerked back. Blood. At the top, they found the bell swinging on its own, as if guided by invisible hands. But there were hands, pale, skeletal, gripping the sides of the great bronze shape. The body attached to them hung limply, swaying with each toll. Pastor Hale, His jaw was open wide, tongue missing, teeth gone, every one of them ripped from the gums. The sheriff stared, unable to breathe. Then the rope twitched, and the bell tolled again. But this time, the sound was wrong. Too sharp, too clean. It wasn't the bell anymore. It was the sound of teeth clinking together, dozens of them, rolling loose inside the metal hollow like dice in a cup. The deputies fled. The sheriff stayed only long enough to pull the rope down and cut it, sending the bell into stillness. But the silence that followed was worse, because underneath it, faint but certain, came a whisper from inside the tower itself. 36 for him. 6 for me. Who'll be next? Sheriff Dodd ran into the fog, never to return. If you heard that bell in your town tonight, would you pray or pack and run? Tell me in the comments below. Dawn broke gray and hollow that morning. The fog clung to the fields, low and heavy, muffling every sound except one. The slow creak of carriage wheels rolling down Harrow Hill. No horses pulled it. It moved by its own weight, gliding through the mist like a shadow remembering where to go. At its helm sat Eliza Harrow, draped in widow's black, her veil fluttering slightly though there was no wind. Behind her carriage, 6 figures followed on foot, barefoot, heads bowed, each wearing torn nightclothes. The sheriff, the deputies, the gravedigger, men who were supposed to be gone. Their eyes were open but empty, their mouths slack, as if each were trying to form a word but couldn't remember how. The townsfolk hid behind curtains as the procession passed, crossing themselves again and again. The widow's carriage stopped at the center of town square, before the church steps where the pastor's blood still stained the stones. She stepped down slowly, her boots crunching on the frost. In her gloved hands, she carried something wrapped in black cloth, long, thin, heavy. She laid it at the foot of the stairs and unwrapped it. The church bell rope, still wet with blood. Your silence, she said softly, her voice carrying through the morning air, was all I needed. Her veil lifted slightly as she looked around the square. Beneath it, her face was pale, but her mouth was wrong. Too wide, too full. The teeth gleamed faintly in the dim light, all shapes and sizes, none belonging to her. One of the women fainted. Another began to pray, but Eliza only smiled. He wakes when they speak of him, she whispered. So you stopped speaking, and now he listens only to me. Behind her, the 6 dead men moved in unison, turning toward the church. Together they began to dig. No one dared intervene as their hands tore at the frozen earth. Within hours, a hole yawned open before the altar. By dusk, they vanished into it. The widow, her followers, and the things she carried. That night the fog lifted, but the air carried a new smell, iron and lilac. The scent of blood, and flowers placed on a grave. Only one thing remained in the town square the next morning, the bell rope, coiled neatly at the church door, tied into a perfect noose. If you saw that procession pass your window, would you watch, or close your eyes? Tell me in the comments below. 3 weeks after the procession vanished, Franklin County began to rot from the inside out. Crops blackened overnight, livestock refused to eat, and the air itself took on a faint, sickly sweetness, like lilacs masking decay. No one spoke her name aloud anymore. To do so was to invite the cold breath that followed every whisper. Then, one night in December, a boy named Caleb Murner stumbled upon something buried near the churchyard. The ground there was soft, though the frost had hardened everything else. He dug with his hands until he struck wood. Not a coffin, but a small box, sealed with melted wax and wrapped in black ribbon. Inside was a leather-bound book, the edges scorched, the pages damp with soil. On the first page, written in delicate script, were the words, "To those who kept quiet." Caleb brought the book to his mother, who carried it straight to Reverend Pike, the man who'd replaced Hale after the funeral bells. The Reverend read the first entry aloud, and his hands began to tremble. It was Eliza Harrow's journal. She wrote of the day Jonathan died, how he'd begged her not to bury him until the moon waned. He feared the in-between, she'd written, that place between breath and death where the body still remembers how to come back. Further pages described her collection. She spoke of visiting graves at night, taking what was still useful. Each tooth, she wrote, held memory, the last taste of bread, the final word spoken, the shape of a name once loved. If I build him from memory, she wrote, he will remember me. But the later pages grew darker. Her handwriting became jagged, erratic. She wrote of a voice that spoke through her husband's mouth, calling her by names she'd never heard. "He knows what I buried," she wrote, "and now he wants more than what was taken." The final entry chilled the room. It read simply, "The teeth do not belong to him. They belong to whoever listens." The Reverend slammed the book shut. He ordered it burned that night, but when the fire was lit, the journal refused to catch. The pages blackened and curled, but no flame would take it. So they buried it again, deep beneath the church floor, and swore never to touch it. Yet sometimes, late at night, the Reverend swore he could still hear the faintest sound beneath the chapel, paper turning itself, one page at a time. "If you found that journal, would you open it, or leave it buried? Tell me in the comments below." It was early January when the snow began to melt, and with it came the stench of something buried wrong. The townsfolk said it was the thaw loosening the graves, but others whispered the truth, that the earth itself was spitting out what it no longer wished to keep. Elias Boone, the new gravedigger, was a man too stubborn for superstition. He'd heard the stories of the widow, the journal, the pact, and dismissed them as hysteria. "The dead stay dead," he told the blacksmith one morning. "It's only the living who go bad." That evening, Elias was called to the churchyard after a sinkhole opened behind the chapel. The ground had caved inward, forming a perfect circle nearly 6 feet across. Beneath the snow, the soil looked bruised, as though something beneath had been pressing upward for weeks. He fetched his spade and lantern, muttering curses as he worked. The deeper he dug, the warmer the earth became. The smell of rot grew thick, but not the scent of decay. It was sweeter, like lilac and candle smoke. By the time he struck wood, the lantern flame was flickering wildly, fighting to stay alive. He cleared the dirt and saw what looked like the corner of a wooden box. Not a coffin, smaller, more like a chest. The lid was carved with initials, E.H. He hesitated, then pried it open. Inside were teeth, hundreds of them, all sizes, all shapes, some still with fragments of gum or bone clinging to them, others polished white as pearl. And beneath them, pages. The same kind of paper the Reverend had buried months earlier. He picked one up, and though the ink was smeared, a single line stood out clearly. "If you dig deep enough, you will hear them breathing." A sound rose from below, faint at first, then growing clearer. A rasping, rhythmic breath. Elias froze. The dirt shifted beneath his boots. And then something knocked. Once, twice from below the hole. He stumbled back, dropping the lantern. The flame hit the ground, igniting the dry roots exposed by the dig. Fire roared through the pit, but the sound didn't stop. The knocking became faster, harder, until with a sharp crack the earth split open. The last thing Elias saw before the fire consumed the pit was a pale hand, long, thin fingers, nails packed with soil, reaching upward. The next morning his spade was found sticking upright in the ground. Elias Boone was never seen again. If you were him, would you have kept digging or run the moment you heard that knock? Tell me in the comments below. By sunrise, the fire in the churchyard had burned itself to ash, leaving behind a scorched hollow that hissed faintly with steam. The snow around it had melted into a perfect ring, dark soil surrounded by frost as though something beneath the earth still radiated. Warmth. No one spoke of Elias Boone that morning. His cottage door was found open, his bed unslept in, his lantern gone. But something was left behind, a single muddy handprint on his table, long-fingered and fresh, though no one had seen a soul enter or leave. The townspeople tried to move on, but small things began to change. Dogs barked at empty corners. Horses refused to pass the churchyard, and every night around the same hour a faint tapping echoed through the valley, soft at first like knuckles against wood, then sharper, closer, almost patient. 3 days later, the blacksmith's apprentice, Thomas Reed, was closing his forge when he saw something glinting beneath the snow. He knelt to pick it up, a gold wedding band, engraved inside with the initials J.H. Jonathan Harrow. The moment his fingers touched it, the air went cold. He looked up, and there, by the edge of the trees, stood a shape. A man, tall and thin, half shrouded by mist. His left arm hung limply at his side, but the right one twitched. Spasmodic, as though trying to remember how to move. Then slowly, deliberately it lifted and waved. Thomas dropped the ring and ran. By dawn, word had spread that the hand had returned, not as flesh, but as something caught between earth and air. Several townsfolk claimed to see it tapping against windows. Others said it scraped at their doors. One woman swore it left teeth on her windowsill, 6 of them arranged in a smile. That night, Reverend Pike gathered what few faithful remained. "This is no ghost," he said, voice trembling. "It's a body unfinished." He meant it literally. For when the townsfolk went to check the churchyard again, they found more signs. Fresh soil disturbed, a trail of deep uneven footprints. And there, pressed into the mud beside the pit, a full handprint. Long fingers, sharp nails, still wet. But this time there were 2. Something else had climbed out. If you woke to find that print on your window, would you dare to look outside? Tell me in the comments below. The first to see it was Margaret Lyle, the widow who lived across from the old schoolhouse. She awoke just before dawn to the faint sound of glass rattling, not from the wind, but from inside the house. Her breath misted in the cold air as she crept toward the parlor. The lantern flickered weakly, its light trembling over the window pane. And there, beneath the frost, was a face, pale, hollow-eyed, not quite human. It pressed itself against the glass as if trying to peer in, its mouth opening and closing, soundless, like a drowned man gasping for air. Margaret screamed, but the sound died in her throat when the thing smiled. Its lips did not move the way lips should. They split upward far too wide, until the corners nearly reached the ears. When she blinked, the face was gone. But on the inside of the window, where no one could have reached, there were 2 long streaks, handprints, dragging downward through the frost. By the time the neighbors arrived, Margaret was shaking uncontrollably, muttering about eyes that see through the glass. They thought she'd gone mad from grief, until she pointed toward the mirror above her mantel. Every reflection in the house was wrong. In the glass, their faces looked a second slower than their real movements, a heartbeat delay, as if the mirror were remembering instead of reflecting. One man leaned closer and swore he saw another face behind his own, pale and shifting, whispering something he couldn't hear. From that day forward, mirrors began to vanish across the town. People covered them with sheets, broke them, buried them. But some swore that even when covered, they still heard soft tapping from the other side. That week, Reverend Pike wrote a sermon no one would forget. "The face you see in the glass," he warned, "is not your own. It's what's waiting when your reflection grows tired of you." That night, as he finished locking the church doors, the Reverend passed by the baptismal basin. The water was still. Then it rippled once, and a face rose slowly through the reflection. Not his own. Its eyes were open, black as oil, its mouth curving in that same broken smile Margaret had described. He stumbled back, knocking over the lantern. The fire spread across the pews, reflecting 100 faces that weren't there. Outside, the bells began to ring, though no one was pulling the rope. If you saw your own face blink before you did, would you smash the mirror, or wait to see what it does next? The old church bell of Ash Hollow had not rung in nearly 6 months. Its rope had long been cut, its tower sealed after the Reverend's death. Yet on the night of November 12, 1851, just as the frost began to settle over the graves, the bell began to toll, slowly, deliberately, as if some invisible hand were drawing it back and letting it fall. The sound rolled through the valley like a moan that wouldn't end. Every house on Main Street trembled. Windows shivered. Dogs howled and refused to stop. By the 5th toll, people began to gather in the square, lanterns in hand, faces pale and uncertain. "It's the Reverend," someone whispered. "He's calling us back." When they reached the church, the doors were open, not broken, open wide and welcoming. A cold wind poured out from within, thick with the smell of candle wax, old hymn books, and something metallic beneath, like the tang of blood left too long in the air. Inside, the pews were scorched black from the fire, but the altar stood untouched. Upon it, someone had placed 27 teeth in a neat little line. Some still had bits of jaw attached, and on the floor beneath the bell tower lay the bell rope, freshly cut. Still frayed, still warm at the end. That was when they heard it again. Not the bell this time. Breathing. Heavy, uneven, echoing from above. A few men carrying oil lamps climbed the tower steps. Each creak echoed like a scream in the wood. The higher they went, the stronger the smell became. Mold, smoke, and something else, something sweet and rotting. When they reached the belfry, they found the rope swinging wildly. But the bell itself was still. It hadn't moved. And yet it was ringing. Each toll came not from the metal striking, but from inside it, as though something within the bell was crying out. One man leaned closer. He said it looked wet inside, like the bronze was sweating blood. When he reached out to touch it, his hand froze midair. His skin began to pale, veins blackening beneath it, his mouth opening in a silent scream, as if the sound had been pulled straight out of him. He collapsed where he stood. The others fled, stumbling down the steps as the bell screamed one final time, a sound so sharp it split the night into silence. By dawn, the bell was gone. Only the frame remained. And in the morning fog, the townsfolk could hear it faintly, somewhere deep beneath the ground, still ringing. Would you follow the sound, or pray it never stops? They called him Elias Crow, a grave digger by trade, a drinker by habit, and a man unafraid of the dark. When talk spread that the bell was still ringing beneath the ground, it was Elias who said, "Then I'll find where it went." He arrived at the church before dawn, carrying only a shovel, a lantern, and a small wooden cross tied with twine. The air smelled of wet earth and ashes. Mist clung to the gravestones like breath frozen in place. He began to dig at the base of the tower where the soil felt loose, as though it had been turned recently. Each scoop of dirt released a scent he could not name, copper, mildew, and something faintly sweet, like fruit that had died long ago. By noon, his lantern light revealed a hollow beneath the foundation. It wasn't a grave. It was a passage, stone-lined, carved in strange, uneven shapes. The walls were damp and covered in marks that looked almost like letters, but they curved too sharply, like teeth biting into the rock. Elias crawled inside. The deeper he went, the colder the air became. His breath hung before him, white and trembling. The sound of the world above, birds, footsteps, wind, all disappeared. Only the bell remained, tolling softly somewhere ahead, muffled but clear. Then the tunnel widened into a chamber. In the center stood a massive wooden crate, split open like a chest wound. Inside it was the church bell, inverted, half buried in the soil. Its bronze surface was slick and dark. Elias lifted his lantern higher and saw what lay beneath the rim, bones, hundreds of them. Small, clean, and orderly, like someone had been collecting them for years. Skulls, too, arranged in circles, their jaws wired open. In each skull's mouth a single human tooth rested, and there, kneeling among them, was a shape. At first Elias thought it was a statue, motionless, draped in black cloth. But when the lantern flame flickered, the figure moved. Slowly its head turned toward him. It was the widow, or what remained of her. Her face had withered into a mask of parchment and hair, but her mouth was filled with teeth not hers. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, pressed into her gums like pearls forced into clay. "Do you hear it?" she rasped. "It calls for the rest." Elias dropped the lantern. It shattered, and the chamber filled with firelight. The bell began to scream. By morning, the church foundation had collapsed. Only the hollow remained, and the sound of one last shovel strike echoing from below. If you'd seen her waiting there, whispering your name, would you have kept digging? After the church collapsed, no one dared approach the ruins for days. Smoke rose from the ground as though the soil itself were breathing. But by the following Sunday, the townspeople gathered, not for service, but for silence. The preacher was dead, the bell was gone, and Elias Crow, the digger, had vanished without a trace. That night, the wind carried strange sounds from the churchyard, faint chattering, like teeth clicking together. Some said it was rats, others swore it came from beneath their very homes. At first it was just noise. Then came the smell, a sickly sweet rot that crept up through floorboards, thick and clinging. It seemed to follow certain families, the ones who had lived near the widow, those who had mocked her, refused her offerings, or stolen from her husband's estate. The odor filled their houses no matter how much they scrubbed. Mrs. Pritchard was the first to tear up her floors. She couldn't stand it any longer. The sound of faint tapping beneath her feet, like something begging to be let out. She pried up a plank, gagging as a waft of decay hit her face. Beneath the wood lay a shallow hollow filled not with soil, but with teeth. Hundreds of them, brown-black, some still with roots. She screamed so loud that neighbors came running. They gathered around, staring down at the pit that seemed to move, faintly, as if the teeth themselves were breathing. The sheriff ordered the area sealed, but that night, every other house that shared the same street heard the same sound. Click, click, click. From beneath the floors, beneath the beds, beneath the walls. The next morning, every dog in town was gone. When they tore open the church cellar, they found the dirt alive with small pale shapes. Not worms, but teeth pushing through the soil like seeds trying to bloom. Some swore they saw them shift toward the surface, as if drawn to warmth, to sound, to breath. The blacksmith's apprentice went mad that evening. He claimed he could feel them moving inside his walls, whispering. He smashed every plank of his floor until his hands bled. When they found him, he was sitting in the wreckage, laughing quietly, holding a single molar between his fingers. "It's mine," he said. "She said I wouldn't need it anymore." That night, the townsfolk gathered and burned 3 houses to the ground, swearing the fire would cleanse whatever remained. But the next morning, the ashes gleamed, white and hard as enamel. If you found 1,000 teeth beneath your home, would you run, or start wondering how many more were left to come? They thought burning the houses would end it, that the flames would swallow whatever had rooted itself beneath their floors. But by the next sunrise, the town of Ash Hollow learned that fire had a memory, and it refused to forget what it touched. The first blaze started at the Pritchard home. By dawn, 3 more houses had caught, though no one had lit a match. The flames moved slow, deliberate, crawling against the wind, spreading not by heat, but by something older. The air smelled not of wood smoke, but of scorched bone. The blacksmith said he saw faces inside the fire, mouths opening and closing, whispering prayers backwards. One man swore he heard laughter in the crackle, a dry, brittle sound like teeth grinding. The sheriff tried to rally the men to fight it. Buckets, blankets, anything. But the water hissed on contact and steam rose that carried voices. Soft, pleading, familiar. They sounded like the dead. When night fell, the flames didn't fade. They only turned blue. From the hilltop, the survivors watched their town glow like a furnace. The church ruins pulsed with light beneath the soil, as though the ground itself was burning from within. And in that glow they saw her, the widow, standing at the edge of the fire untouched. Her dress black, her skin ashen, her eyes reflecting every flame like tiny suns. She lifted her hands, and for a moment the fire bent, arched toward her, like a congregation bowing before a preacher. Someone shouted her name. She turned her head, slow as the hour hand of a clock, and smiled. That broken, impossible smile. The air went still. Then the flames shifted, racing not toward the church, but toward the living. By dawn, the town was gone. Only the foundations remained, blackened, skeletal, steaming. The fire hadn't consumed. It had hollowed. Every wooden beam, every nail, even the stones had been cored out from within, as if something had eaten the heart of the town and left the shell behind. Yet at the center of all that ruin, the widow's house still stood, perfect, unburned. The new sheriff, a man from Clay County, rode in weeks later to assess the damage. He found the entire valley silent, no birds, no livestock, no wind. But when he stepped into the widow's parlor, he saw something that chilled him more than the fire ever could. The walls were covered in soot, but in the soot were marks, handprints, hundreds of them, small, large, overlapping, and written above them in ash were 4 words, "The fire is hungry." If the fire called your name, would you run from it? Or answer? The widow's house stood at the edge of the valley like a scar the fire couldn't erase. Its roof unscorched, its windows intact, its garden still blooming, even though the soil around it was charred black for miles. To those who returned to see what was left of Ash Hollow, the house felt wrong. Too quiet, too alive. When the wind passed through the ruins, it howled like mourning. But when it reached her house, it stopped. The new sheriff, Jonathan Harker, dismounted and approached cautiously. The porch boards didn't creak beneath his boots. The doorknob was cold, unnaturally cold, and when he turned it, the door opened with a soft sigh, as if the house had been holding its breath for him. Inside, everything was perfectly preserved. The curtains white, the floor polished, the air heavy with the faint scent of lavender and decay. On the mantel, dozens of framed portraits stared down at him, all men. Each had a strange smile, a peculiar tilt of the head, and something missing. Teeth, their mouths were empty. As Harker moved deeper inside, he heard the faint ticking of a clock, though none were visible. The sound came from the floorboards themselves, a rhythmic click, 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 like teeth knocking together in laughter. The parlor table was set for one. A cup of tea sat steaming, though it had no source of heat, and beside it lay a small, leather-bound journal, the initials AWO pressed into the cover. He opened it. The writing inside was delicate but frantic. Page after page filled with sketches of teeth, diagrams of jaws, and notes written in a trembling hand. Each tooth remembers the mouth it came from. To keep them quiet, they must be fed. The bell is the key. When it rings, they wake. Then a final entry dated the night before the fire. They are almost complete. Tonight I will finish the last mouth. The sheriff's lantern flickered. The shadows along the wall began to move as if the wallpaper were breathing. And then he heard it, a voice soft as silk from behind him. "Are you here to collect too?" He turned. The widow stood at the top of the stairs, her face pale, her eyes glassy and wrong, as if she were made of wax. In her hands she held something small and white that caught the light, a molar still wet with blood. She smiled, teeth upon teeth upon teeth, and when the sheriff reached for his gun, the house sighed again, this time louder, hungrier. "If you stood in that doorway and she offered you your own tooth back, would you take it?" By the time the sheriff's deputy reached Ash Hollow, the sun had not yet risen. The valley lay drowned in mist, thick and gray as milk. Not a bird stirred. The widow's house stood there still, perfect as always, untouched by time or fire, but the door was wide open, swinging gently with the wind. He called for Sheriff Harker. No answer, only the faint sound of something metallic, deep and distant, like chains brushing stone. He stepped inside, lantern trembling in his grip. The parlor was empty now. The portraits were gone. The table overturned. And across the floor, in lines and spirals, lay hundreds of teeth, arranged with impossible care, each one polished, each one pointing inward toward the staircase. At the foot of those stairs lay the sheriff's badge, blackened and bent. It looked as though it had been swallowed and spat back out. The deputy followed the faint metallic sound upward, step by step. The air grew colder, heavier. The smell of candle wax and earth clung to his clothes. When he reached the top, he saw light flickering under the attic door, orange, low, and pulsing. He pushed it open. The attic was no longer an attic. The floor had been torn open, revealing a pit of dark soil below. Hanging above it, suspended by strands of human hair, was the bell. The same bell that had vanished from the church weeks before. Only now it was alive. It pulsed like a heart, its bronze slick with blood, and with every slow toll the air vibrated. Around it, thousands of teeth spun gently in the air, orbiting like white stars, whispering in a chorus too soft to understand. And at the center, beneath the bell, knelt the widow, her face lifted as he entered. The light caught her eyes, hollow and gleaming. When she spoke, it wasn't her voice. It was dozens of voices, layered, male and female, old and young, all crying through the same mouth. "He wanted to stop it," she said. "So I gave him peace." She held up something small, the sheriff's last tooth, and placed it reverently at the base of the bell. The toll that followed shook the entire valley. Outside, the mist thickened. Every grave in the churchyard split open. And from beneath the earth came a sound that would haunt Missouri for generations, a slow, rhythmic chattering, as though the dead were gnashing their teeth in time with the bell. By morning, the widow's house was gone. Only the empty foundation remained. But when travelers pass through Ash Hollow even today, they say if the wind is still and the night is cold, you can hear it faintly beneath your feet, the low, patient toll of the last bell. If you heard it once, would you dare listen twice?